Hello and welcome to Education in Focus, where today we will be having a chat about appeals, specifically in relation to admissions to schools. Education in Focus is a podcast brought to you by Adoption Focus, and it's a space to delve into all things school and adoption related. My name is Leigh and I'm the training manager at Adoption Focus. The education of our children is a real passion of mine, so it's a privilege to have with me again today Jason with a primary education background.
Hello, lovely to be here again.
Hiya, Jason. And Lisa, whose background is mainly in secondary education.
Hi, Leigh. Good to be back.
Hiya. So, just for you listeners, within Education in Focus, we will explore a range of topics and we would really welcome your suggestions, questions and contributions. So please feel free to drop us an email at education@adoption-focus.org.uk. Some topics we explore will be specific to adoption and the needs of our children, whilst others will be more generic. We will never profess to be the experts on every school and every child, but we will endeavour to offer you different perspectives. So, thinking about appeals for school admissions, Jason and Lisa, is there any guidance around the appeals process? Is there any variation local authority to local authority or school to school? It's a big question.
It is. Well, the starting point is yes to all of those. So let's move on.
Okay.
Perhaps we should give a bit more detail than that. I'd start the DFE site. Again, it actually does give really good, clear guidance. And if you're a parent, I think it's very readable and quite digestible if you ever need to. I would also say that what we talk about today is probably going to be not relevant to children who have an EHCP, but we will talk about that a little bit later. So it's a slightly different process. And also, if you're thinking about appeals where you're looking at infant class sizes, where it's limited to 30, that process is, again, different to what we're going to talk about, but we will mention it later. So yeah, it goes to the DFE code, which is really, I suppose, it's only ever become relevant to a parent if they're going to try and get a place in a school where they're oversubscribed, really. I mean, hopefully everyone's aware that the highest priority is always given to looked after children or previously looked after children, so they're top of the list when it comes to consideration for place admissions. But yeah, each local authority or academy trust is an admissions authority, and they have to have a admissions policy of their own, but it has to follow the national guidance. So it's where it starts looking confusing. So if you look at the national guidance, you can guarantee wherever you're looking in terms of schools and academies and so on, they have to follow that national guidance anyway. But I know, Lisa, you've got some info about how it can also vary certain types of school, can't it?
Yeah, it can. On the face of it, as an adoptive parent, I was always aware that I could apply to any school that I felt would best meet my child's needs. So it didn't matter whether it was outside the local authority area in which I lived. It didn't matter if I was outside of their catchment area. My daughter, because she was previously looked after, would be prioritised, and that was good to know. But there are some schools where they don't actually have to apply that priority idea, or they can apply it slightly differently. So if, example, you've applied for a grammar school that is based 100% on selective testing, then their admissions policy is about the results of the entry test, and that is it. So they don't have to apply any kind of prioritising whatsoever. If you're applying to a faith-based school, this can get quite confusing, but looked after and previously looked after children of the faith are prioritised above other children of the faith. However, if your child is not of the faith, then they don't have to be prioritised above other children of the faith. A school could voluntarily choose to prioritise your child, but they don't have to. So it's just being aware that in either of those two situations, this idea of prioritising previously looked after children might not apply.
Oh, I didn't realise that. So thank you, Lisa. If, say, we do appeal and we're granted an appeal hearing, what happens? Because I imagine as a parent that is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it must be awful. Well, the first thing you find out is you get a letter which will give a rejection of place and give a reason. And then that's when the guidance sort of kicks in and sort of timescales have to be followed. So at that point, there's 20 days from that date of that letter for you as a parent to submit an appeal. And then at some point there's a hearing. Again, if there's a hearing, you have to go. You go to it. You get a minimum of 10 school days notice. So hopefully, it gives you time to book that time of work or whatever it is you need to do to try and be there. Now, I think I will say it's one thing I hadn't really appreciated until I started looking into all of this information. But if you have a second place choice that you'd rather not send your child to, you can still accept that place, and it doesn't mean you've lost your appeal and immediately you've sort of written that off. You can still do it. So for some people, that's probably not a bad idea to accept the second place that you've been offered, but still appeal the first place school that you want.
I think that's really good advice, because the worst outcome would be that you'd go through the appeals process, not be successful, and then not have any place for your child at all. So knowing that you can accept a second place choice and it not impact upon your appeals process, accept the second place choice just in case, that you know that you have got a place.
And maybe it's worth saying at this point as well, I was going to perhaps mention it later, but I think it might be a good idea to say now, which is I would go and arrange to visit that second school if you don't know it already. Just in case, you never know. I've worked with some families just through this role, actually, where they didn't get the first choice of school. We were supporting them to try and appeal. And when they went to the second school, they really liked it and realised that actually this was going to be an ideal setting for their child. So perhaps things they'd heard and read weren't quite the truth. But when you get to a place, again, we talked about this in one of our other podcasts about choosing a school, about the importance of visiting a place and getting a feel and a sense of the place and the staff that work there and the sort of environment that it is. So, having said all that, so the rejection letter isn't always the awful news it might seem at first, but of course that isn't necessarily the case for everyone, because you might not have another school that's down the road. You might be the school that you've been hoping to send your child to might be the only one within miles, and you're going to be struggling. So, I think we need to talk about what happens next in the appeal. So it can sound very daunting, but the appeals process is meant to be as fair and as transparent as possible. And they can be held either in person or remotely. Now, in an appeal, again, you get you'll get plenty of notice. We'll talk about some ideas of things you might want to say as a parent to prepare yourself for it. But the way it's set up is that there's a panel, usually about 3 people, a chair, and they've got to include at least one lay person who has not got an educational background, and certainly nobody in the panel is allowed to have any connection with the local authority or admissions authority or the school, or indeed a parent. It wouldn't be fair either way. So one has to be a lay person who's got a non-education background, so they can see it, I suppose, from a purely dispassionate point of view. Then someone who has got an educational background could be part of it. So maybe someone who's a teacher but has got nothing to do with the local authority or nothing to do with the schools that they're discussing. They can't be a member of a governing body or previous governing body. So essentially what we're saying is the panel who make the decision are detached from the local authority. They're not part of the local authority. So they're not kind of in their pocket or anything like that. So that's some reassurance. I think they'll always try and keep an odd number of people, because then if there's ever a disagreement, you generally get an answer, because there's nobody having a split decision. So if it's not 3, it'll probably be 5. If you have 4, it's going to be awkward. Now, the process itself, you would get an invitation to the appeal hearing, and it can be either in person or it can be remote. Now, at that stage, in the background, I'm thinking about my experience as a head. I would also get a letter as a head explaining this appeal's happening, and they'd want the school's submission. They don't always ask the school to turn up in person, but they might ask the school to write or complete some documentation to evidence why this place has been rejected. And I'm thinking of examples where they might want to know precisely what the child to adult ratio is that you've got, and what are your class size, not just number of pupils in your classes, but also how big are the classrooms, because these things matter. And as a head, you might also add other information, which could be quite important. So I'm thinking of cases where I would love to have had a child, but we really didn't think it was in the child's interest to come to our school, because they would have to go to a class where there were probably 2 very high-profile children who would probably have triggered the new child and probably upset the entire balance. And I don't think anyone would have benefited from that. And that's not always obvious when you're looking at figures and admission numbers and things like that. So sometimes those bits of information are quite critical. But they may actually choose at some point just to go, oh, actually, we're not going to challenge this appeal or just let it go. Because quite often they do. Quite often, even though you might get an appeal hearing, the schools sometimes will just say, yeah, we're not going to challenge this because ultimately we know we're probably not going to win it.
That's really interesting, actually, because I think as a parent it can sometimes be quite daunting. But knowing that you could submit your appeal and actually the school might go, well, okay, fair enough, we'll agree. It, it's worth submitting an appeal, then, isn't it? It's worth kind of starting that
Yeah.
in the hope that perhaps you might get that kind of response.
So the appeal process itself can then be, from a parent's point of view, like I say, it could be in person or remote. I think a lot of remote ones are probably hung over from the COVID days, but I think it works a lot for a lot of people. They don't like the idea of going to a room. I can understand, it feels a bit intimidating. But you can take someone with you. You could, as a parent, you could take someone along with you if you want to support you. But if you're doing it remotely, you probably don't. It probably won't feel quite so intimidating, probably. But again, you can still have someone with you. At that point, again, it's interesting. I didn't know for sure whether it all happened at the same time, but sometimes the appeal hearings don't happen in a sense that you all sit in a room together and say your piece and then you go and the panel makes decisions. Sometimes it does, but if there's a lot of appeals taking place, sometimes what happens is the panel will hear the local authority giving its reasons for all of the cases it's presenting that day, and then the local authority person goes away, and then the parents all come and give their cases in relation to this. So the parents never have to sit in the same room as the local authority person who's giving the reasons why they've rejected. So, which I suppose must be quite a bit less stressful, a bit nicer.
Yeah.
Yeah, at some point you would get your chance to explain why you think your child should go to that school. Now, ultimately, if it's not down to a real clear numbers issue, like the infants' class sizes, then it'll come down to things like, are your reasons for your child going to that school going to be outweighing the school's reasons for not having the child there? And that's where it's a balance of, that's where the judgment has to come, and that's quite difficult. But that's where we'll probably talk a little bit about the kind of things you might want to consider as a parent in terms of what your appeal should talk about, really.
And I just want to say there that, when you have when you apply for an appeal, when you start that process, and when you go into your hearing, it's really clear that you have your reasons like front and center of in your mind, because this is the opportunity to make sure that your voice is heard and to try and get the outcome that you want. So if you do want any support, then chat it over with your adoption agency, thinking about, okay, what are the reasons? How do I convey them?
Yeah.
We are here at Adoption Focus to kind of like help you formulate your plan of attack if you want, because what you don't want to be doing is saying, oh, well, as a parent, it's really handy for me because it's only a 5-minute drive from work. That's not a reason for why your appeal will be successful. We need to be focusing on the needs of your child and how that school is best placed to meet those needs above and beyond another school. Those are kind of the things that we need to be thinking of.
Yeah.
So if you are struggling to come up with those reasons, or you're struggling to kind of organise your thoughts around that, then use friends and family members as a sounding board, but also ask your adoption agency for a bit of advice and guidance on that.
It's difficult. It's an emotional time. It's really emotional. Before it comes to the tips, it just reminded me of a situation where it's quite a perverse situation actually. Where I was in the school, and some parents had been told they hadn't got a place at my school, and I thought, and because it's local authority that was handling the process, I remember saying to them, parent, well, I don't see why they can't come. I'm more than happy for them to come in. I know it's 1 or 2 over our number, but there was room. Physically, there was room. And we had mixed classes, so you could spread them out a little bit. But the local authority still refused it, even though the school said it. So we were saying yes. The parents said, yeah, can we please come to the school? But the LA was saying, no, you can't. It doesn't meet it doesn't follow the guidance and the code. And if you do that, then you have to let all the others in who are perhaps not on your waiting list, and you end up with 20 children that you don't want or something. It's like, so it can be a bit odd. And from a parent's point of view, they perhaps don't always realise the head teacher isn't always the last person who's making that decision. It can be really difficult. So I was upset on their behalf, actually. Anyway, that's just a strange situation that can sometimes arise. So in terms of tips, definitely make notes and take them with you and have them with you because you're not expected to just do it, reel it all off from memory. I think you need to think about what the school you want can offer your child that the others, perhaps others that you've been offered, can't offer. And that's why it helps to visit it perhaps as well, because you've actually seen it. You can see for yourself if the second school actually isn't good, doesn't have the facilities or the staff ratios or the ethos, whatever, then you can really say from a point of being quite well informed.
I don't know the answer to this question, so I'm just putting it out there. But on the list of reasons why you might want your child to go to a school, is it acceptable to say, thinking about the emotional needs that some of our children have, think about the difficulty that they might have forming friendships. Could you put as part of your argument, they know people, they have firm friendships, and we want those to be maintained because they do find it difficult to make friends. And if they went to a different school, they wouldn't know anyone. Would that be an acceptable reason to put in your appeal, or do we need to steer clear of that and focus more on what the school can offer? So it might be certain specialisms or a good Senko department or, speech and language therapy. Are we allowed to have that softer side, do you think, or should it really be very...
No, absolutely, definitely, because for a parent who's got their birth child who doesn't have additional needs, that might seem a little bit, yeah, well, it's a bit of a shame. I know they've got friends they'd rather be with, but, sorry, we can't do this on this occasion. They'll probably make friends, they'll probably find it a bit upsetting, but they won't perhaps find it as difficult as perhaps our children would. So what we have to say as adoptive parents is make it very clear that our children have specific issues with friendships or relationships. They've suffered loss, for example, on many occasions, and this could be another trigger, another huge loss. They're going to real struggle. You can bring the evidence with you, and again, it's where you might want someone from Adoption Focus or somebody like that to come along and give you that evidence behind it. So there may be an assessments carried out, psychological assessments, all sorts of stuff that's happened that just gives you that secure background knowledge that it's not just a case of, oh, it's a bit upset, she's not got the friend she wanted. Could be massive, could be really, really massive.
Yeah.
And if those friends live in the local area and your child does, that's a long-term impact because they're always going to, when they meet them in the park and all that kind of stuff, it's just they're going to be reminded that they're not in the same school and class. So these things could have much bigger impacts. So think about their emotional well-being. It's absolutely, yeah, definitely. It's not not just about outcomes. Yeah. So one of the questions could be, what's the impact on your child of not getting this place? Okay, what would be the impact? And being realistic, you don't want to over-egg it, but equally, don't be shy of saying it could be really traumatic, re-traumatizing. It could set them back months, if not more, and so on and so on. You need to avoid things like saying it's a nice area, a lot of parking, like you said before, getting to work, all that sort of stuff. I mean, that might be annoying. It might be true, but it's not going to be enough to uphold your appeal.
It has to be very focused on child's needs,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
not family
Totally on the
needs or
needs of the
parents'
child.
convenience, or it's choosing what to say and what not to say is part of the skill, I think, in having a successful appeal, isn't it?
Yeah, so have your evidence, I'd say, there, and that should give you a stronger case, I'd say. And then the school has to show why it would be not in their interest to be there. They might say it's overcrowded, not enough room, your child needs some space to go, a quiet area, for example, if they find it difficult to regulate their emotions or something, I don't know, but they haven't got a space like that. The room's very busy, they might have loads of children with special needs who struggle with their emotions, who might set your child off, so I don't know, but that's where the other side might put their case forward. But it might just be a very simple case of, oh, it's above our number. That if it's just above the number and it's not Key Stage 1 class, then you're much more likely to succeed, I'd say. Because you can also use the word vulnerable. Don't forget to say your child is a vulnerable child, because that's a specific category in itself anyway, which always means you have to give priority to their needs.
Just thinking then about this limit with kind of Key Stage 1 classes, how does it become a little bit different? Because my understanding is that an adopted child gets priority. Why does that not happen in reception?
There's a legal limit to the amount of the class size. It has to be 30. So I think the implications would be that if they went above that number, some schools might say they have to employ another teacher and things like that, which becomes hugely expensive. But there is such thing as an accepted pupil or an accepted child. Accepted. So that's a legal definition in the guidance which talks about being able to appeal on a very narrow basis against the 30 pupil place. So rather than being more flexible around the needs of the child and the settings, it's much more around your child is one of those particular categories of children where there may actually be a loophole, as it were, a legal loophole, which is where they're allowed to go in above that number. It is quite rare, but it can happen. for the reason that they might be looked after or post looked after, and that's one of them. I think along with the EHCP, they would have also become eligible for that consideration. So it is harder to get in if it's a 30 pupil limit, but it's not impossible.
It does make me feel quite sorry for that teacher who may then have 31 reception age children in one room.
Yeah, and if they've got needs, you've got to think about that as well from your child point of view. If your child has additional needs and they're in a very large class, is that going to help them? Is that in their best interest? I don't know. Might be. It depends on what else the school offers, but it's there's a lot to weigh up, which is why it's so difficult for parents. Really, it's you never know if you're doing the right thing.
I think that's a really good point because there's that age old. Is it best to be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a bigger pond? And okay, we're not talking about anything other than if your child does need that level of support, then perhaps being in a slightly smaller class size is going to be beneficial. And if they do tip over into that 31 category, is that going to disadvantage? Even though the school can offer all these wonderful things, if you're in a very large class size, are they actually going to have access to those things? Are they going to have access to the support that you envisage?
So, such a balancing act, isn't it, as an adoptive parent?
It is. And it goes back to balancing, it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Jason, is there's nothing wrong with going to see your second choice school and finding out more about them, because you may come away from that visit and think, well, okay, initially I'd wanted this other school, but actually on reflection, there's not that much between them. And here there will be a smaller class size. Here they will have more attention and support. And actually it's better than pushing it at our first place.
And equally, on the other side, hope that would be the case, and I think in lots of cases it will, but if you went there and you were horrified with what you saw, then that's probably good evidence for your appeal. So if you've been there and you've seen something that just makes you think this is totally unsuitable for my child.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. You've shown willing to consider the other options available, but in considering those other options, you realise how completely unsuitable they are.
Yeah.
You're really putting it on that appeal process and on the people making the decision to say, I'm telling you clearly how this school is better for my child's needs and how the other school is not going to be. You can really talk about the impact that's going to have on them being in a place that is not suitable.
But then be careful, because if you get that school and have to take them there, But
good point, well made.
I doubt that it's going to be that awful. I mean, really, it shouldn't be. But there may be things that just strike you as not quite as good and not the right fit, let's say.
But there may be some things that the school aren't quite doing that potentially they could use the Child's Pupil Premium Plus for, and we've got a podcast about that if you're interested in hearing it. So sometimes it's just about being that advocate, isn't it? It's not always that it's a permanent non-fix of a school.
Absolutely. And if you did, in the end, lose the appeal, then that's not the end of it forever. You could go on the waiting list then for the school that you still wanted to go to. So it could be that you may decide to take the second option, but still wanted to go back. And when a place comes available in the first school, then you'd be notified and your child would move. Of course, moving schools might not be the best thing anyway for your child. The last thing they might need is another move.
It's like on the one hand, I'm thinking, yes, go on the waiting list because eventually it might still work. But then you're almost setting your child up for another major transition, aren't you? And potentially losing the connections that they've made in the first school. And it's really, like you said, Leigh, a balancing act, isn't it? Do we stick with that first choice throughout, or do we weigh up the fact that actually another transition at some later point would be worse?
It's really hard.
It is, and I've just thought about another consideration is how you as parents manage this and in front of your child, because if you make it very clear that you've set your heart on a school and you kind of implicitly, or you've implied the other school's not as good, but your child ends up going there, you suddenly got to say, "Oh no, it'll be fine." You're sort of contradicting yourself slightly in it, and you may be giving a message to your child that the school they're going to isn't really good enough, and never mind. It's not. It's a bit awkward, isn't it? So it's so
and we
hard.
also know that our children can incorrectly attribute things that happen around them as being their fault. And if they do inadvertently get the message that they're going to a worse school, they could believe that that's inherent because they are inherently bad. That, we know it's got nothing to do with them. It's to do with class sizes. It's to do with all kinds of things that's got nothing to do with them. But in their mind, they might attribute it to the fact that they didn't deserve to go to the good school. The good school didn't want them as people. And I think we have to be very careful as parents to tread that line and make sure that they're not getting that message.
No, absolutely, Lisa. So you said that you can go on a waiting list if you lose the appeal. Can you appeal the appeal? Can you complain about the appeal?
You can. Again, all the guidance will be there. I would expect if you were given a rejection, then they would give you links and information about how to complain. You can only complain really on the grounds that the process wasn't handled according to the guidance and the code. So,
okay, so procedural.
You can't really appeal. Once the decision's made, it's made.
And that's why it's so important to go to that first appeal with all your kind of ducks in a row, so you know what you're saying about the needs for your child, because there isn't going to be a second chance where you can argue that. You only get to appeal it based on how it was handled and whether correct procedure, correct guidance was followed.
I suppose they have to keep, because ultimately this thing to drag on, it's in no one's interest for it to go on for months and months, is it?
Not at all. I wondered if one of our children has an education, health and care plan, an EHCP, is admissions or the appeal process different in that respect?
From what I can see, it yes, I think it is. The DFE says, and this is quoting from their code, all children whose education, health and care plans name the school must be admitted. If the school is not oversubscribed, all applicants must be offered a place. Well, that's obviously clear. So if it's oversubscribed and they name that school, I don't see how they can turn it down.
That's brilliant. Thanks, both. And actually, sorry, I just wanted to ask, how long would it take for you to know the outcome of an appeal?
It's quite a quick turnaround, isn't it, Jason?
Yeah, it's in 5 days from the appeal hearing. You'll find out.
Okay.
Yeah, like you said before, it's in no one's interest for this to drag on. Ideally they want to get all appeals done, dusted and sorted as quickly as possible so that people can start making plans for the next academic year, be that the school making plans or, be it parents making plans in terms of getting themselves organised and preparing for that transitional phase. So, yeah, it is all over and done with quite quickly.
Yeah, I'd say as a tip, though, because it can be an emotional minefield, get support if you need it, do ask for help.
Yeah, that would be the tip that I'd go for as well, is recognise that it is quite intense, it is quite draining, it is very emotional. And, we set ourselves up sometimes as parents or, specifically adoptive parents in this instance, we think that this choice is going to really impact upon the future of our child in big ways. And so we can take a lot on ourselves when we're trying to get the right school for our children. Recognise that and seek support from your support network, but do seek support from your adoption agency as well, because you don't have to do this alone. And we can help take some of that emotional pressure away and focus on the rational argument that's needed to win the appeal.
Sound advice.
Well, thanks so much, Jason and Lisa. I know that I've got a lot to think about after this podcast, and we really hope that you at home do too. Be sure to look out for other episodes, some of which were mentioned today, such as People Premium Plus. And don't forget, you can contact us at any time with your suggestions for topics to cover, contributions if you fancy joining us on the podcast, or questions. And you can contact us at education@adoption-focus.org.uk. Thanks for listening.